So the process literally was officially kicked off last Friday. As you can imagine, it's an enormous feat, and at the very earliest, the number that you may hear is 2012. You will also hear that that may very well become 2013. But the process is in place to put a 4-year campus in Greenville.
Once you get called for an interview, what are your chances of getting in? Like, what's the ratio like?
It's about 1 in 3. Okay? If you look at the number of applications that Dr. Thornhill goes through, and the number that we actually interview, which is in that 350 range, and then of course you're going to accept X number, which may be 100, 120 to matriculate 90, because many people hold multiple applications and they'll only end up, or acceptances, and they'll only end up in one school. So it roughly works about 1 in 3. Would that be a fair statistic?
That's correct.
And it may vary a little, 1 in 2.8, 1 in 3.1. So getting to the interview is the first step. And then once you get there, instead of competing for 1 in 2,000 slots, you've heard how the math works in your favor tremendously getting there. But you have to be able to get to the interview. And to get to the interview, it's a culmination of many things. And those who are freshmen and sophomore, you know, who are here, I really salute you for being here. Not that I don't salute the others, but the point is that you look at that GPA. Remember, once you generate a GPA, you can't get rid of it. So when that freshman GPA comes in, and it wasn't really what you wanted it to be because you were not really focused on education at this point, you really didn't understand what the medical applications were all about, and that GPA comes in, again, but it's going to impact on your total GPA. There's nothing you can do about it. So if you're here earlier, you recognize, gosh, I need to be recognizing the importance of the GPA, because I kind of look at the interview to get to the interview and further to the acceptance process as a 3-legged stool. You've got your GPA, and the average GPA for med school is 3.6. That's the average. Okay? Now, if that generation of that freshman 2.1, it's hard to get that average up to 3.6. Now, we do look at progress, and we understand the freshman year, if you will. But we are starting to look for improvements in GPA, for example. As the courses get harder and you move up, your grades get better, then we're very forgiving of that freshman GPA, as an example. So when I give you these numbers, these are guidelines, these are ballparks, but he looks at the individual 2,000, all of you, teases these kind of informational items out to make your application be the best that it can be. However, you need to take the responsibility of understanding what is going into this application, because you have the duty to make your application be the best it can be. So the GPA is the 1-legged stool. The second 1-legged stool is the MCAT. And I know the freshmen and sophomores haven't taken it yet. Some of the juniors may not have taken it yet. The seniors, I would think, have at least looked into it. That's the 3rd-legged stool, and those are the numbers. The average MCAT for our school is about a 28.3, and there are kind of 3 different areas that you look at in terms of the verbal reasoning, the biological sciences, and the physical sciences. The average being 28.3 would be something like a 10.99. 10-10-9 if you looked at it that way. And then there's a writing sample that's graded between J and T. J you wrote nothing. T you wrote the Pulitzer Prize. And the average is 28.30. Okay, so that you can judge what that number might be relative to your average. And then the third part of the 3-legged stool is all that other stuff. And all that other stuff are your letters of recommendation, your personal statement, your application itself regarding your experiences, whatever you write into, right, and it's going into your particular situation. And so that's what's looked at to get you to the interview. And then once you're at the interview, all of those things are still potentially part of the interview, but we now know the numbers. We kind of have a sense of your academic horsepower. What the interview is about is to see your humanistic side. To see, you know, what kind of person are you, and what kind of future physician are you going to be potentially for the state of South Carolina? What is your heart like? Okay? What are your experiences like? How can you validate for me that you know what you're getting into and this is what you want to do? Because we kind of got the science. I mean, we know the brain power because we've got these numbers that we can work at and look at and give us a sense of that. And so that kind of goes into the process. And then You're interviewed by 2 people, you get a score, you come to the admissions committee, you're presented, every member of the admissions committee, which is about 24, 25 people, vote, averaged, and your number throws in, and there it falls into line with everybody else's applied. And that's hence whether you would get an admission acceptance or not. So that's quick and dirty how the process works. Does that kind of give you, there are more details, and I'm happy to go into it, but at least I want everyone, certainly the freshmen and sophomores, to at least get an overall view of what this is about. And then as you move into your junior and senior, obviously a lot of these things become more specific, more detailed, you know, more attention has to be paid to it. But that's the rough construct, is that fair to say, of the admissions process? Okay?
Just my only comment I would make real briefly, though, is the 28.3, Dr. Stahl was talking about, that's our average. That's not the national average for the MCAT. National average for the MCAT is actually 31.
But if you looked at MUSC, because I go with Wanda Taylor, she and I talk together, she's the equivalent kind of us at MUSC, and I think the MUSC has about 28.6 or 7. So for the state of South Carolina, you know, these numbers are roughly about the same for both schools. Remember that in medical schools, and this is kind of a reflection of your question too, you've got state schools, you have private schools, and you have other. Other or offshore schools, or maybe DO schools, okay? So if you look at state schools, you understand that the legislature is very supportive of medical education, and you look at more of your state applicants than you would from a private school who really has no state boundary, and kind of all players are equal across the United States. And then depending on your needs about osteopathy and DO school, and you know, they're looking at starting that one in Spartanburg, that can still parlay you, if you will, into a residency and move you into the medical profession. And I'm not an expert on the difference between those schools, the DOs and MD schools, but I can tell you I work in residency, pediatric residency, and we have MDs and DOs in our residency, and you would not know the difference. Okay? Now, we interview them, and obviously we look at them as individuals and select them based on the fit of the program in their future, but that's just another thing that you will hear people talk about that's out there. There's a little bit difference. There are actually 2 branches of DO schools. There's some that are a lot more osteopathy and some that are a little bit less osteopathy. But I'm just throwing that for completeness so you can understand those are the things that are out there in the field. Yes, ma'am.
I was told when I asked about medical school, for example, that once you get the interview, that's like your most important step. So if your GPA or your MCAT is on the lower side, that it's really your interview that plays the important factor if you get in, not more or less your GPA or MCAT. Like, I know it has a weight in this score, but how true is it? Like, would your interview be more important? Or
let me answer it this way. There are schools that have a weighted scoring system. We don't. Okay? We look at you as an individual. So there's no percentage, there's no profile that you park into based on the numbers. Okay? Yeah. Now, you have to get to the interview, and those numbers parlay into that, like I mentioned. But I would, and there are schools in the United States that are blinded to the numbers once you get an interview. But we're not like that. So it would be less than honest if I told you that once you get to the interview, your GPA or your numbers are thrown out. That would not be true. We still look at those as particular interviewers. We might talk about them, investigate them, put them in the overall picture of the strengths of your application, balanced by the weaknesses of your application, and then what the competition is for the whole year. So, again, I wouldn't be giving you the best advice to say, well, once you get the interview, you don't have to worry about the numbers. That's just not true. Because when you present it to all the members of the committee, and each member of the committee is different. I will tell you that. We each have the way we view an application. Well, we're looking at those numbers, and there are some admissions committee members that are a little more big on the MCAT than the GPA. Some more the GPA than the MCAT. Some combination thereof. You know, which kind of we like, because then that promotes diversity, and and it promotes the ability to not just have a clone, or that we don't have a cookie cutter person, and you're the Stepford wife. And if you're a Stepford wife, you're going to get in, but if you're not, you're not. That's not what we're interested in. We recognize that physicians, sometimes they're hard to get your arms around. They're different type of people, but they have some commonalities. And those commonalities are the desire to help people, the desire to many times be selfless, the desire to understand what you're giving back, as opposed to it revolving around you. And we are trying to pick all that kind of stuff up in that interview, in addition to recognizing and understanding what you are bringing to the school and what you're going to do for us, as well as what we're going to do for you. You want to add to that? Subtract from it?
Yeah, I think to add to it, not to detract from it. Dr. Stallworth mentioned that you might have a rocky year. That's common. It might be your freshman year, it might be that you had personal issues during a particular semester. And your opportunity in your interview to explain a difficult semester, or to explain an MCAT that is not as high as you want, will really help you to lessen the impact of potentially lower GPA or lower MCAT than you wish you had. And I say that because there is nothing better to do than to simply be honest and explain, this is what happened in my sophomore year, this is what happened on my MCAT. Don't make excuses, just explain it. And don't blame your professors. Okay? You know, it's okay if you have a reasonable explanation for that. But don't get too hung up on the GPA and MCAT either. I think it's important for us to say that a 4.0 and a 38 MCAT at times is rejected from medical school because of the very reasons that Dr. Stallworth was talking about. Because during the interview, things don't go well in terms of the passion that the individual has to do medicine, in terms of the personal skills. All of you, when you go to the doctor, you don't ask him or her, were you #1 in your class? Did you go to Harvard? You want someone who can sit down, listen to you, make you feel like he or she is concerned about your concerns, and you want to leave that physician thinking, you really cared about me. And unless you have certain interpersonal skills that we can assess during your interview, again, that spectacular MCAT and spectacular GPA is no guarantee. So, yeah, we seem to have talked a lot about GPA and MCAT, but there's other equally important things that we look at from an admissions standpoint. So it doesn't automatically put you on an absolutely level ground with that 38 MCAT and 4.0, but it sure does help the way you come across to them.
Since you're talking about GPA, being Clemson students and Clemson graduates, do they get any extra consideration, like the Barron scale, or is that something you consider at USC?
Well, I know that USC does. And I say that because I'm with Wanda Taylor, so I'm not saying that you're standing here. They do rank colleges in the 4 quartiles, and where the college fits, that comes back into that formula that I was mentioning, which we don't have. However, we do understand strength of education. We do understand the reputation of Clemson, the positive reputation of Clemson, as opposed to just to make up Southside School for the impaired or something, if you came from there. So we understand the rigor of the curriculum. We understand what a particular grade in a particular course at that particular school really represents. Now, where we get caught sometimes is when we have that applicant from Illinois who gets a interview because they have a close South Carolina tie, and that college we may not know as much, and I'm just being honest about that particular school. But members of the admissions committee are from all schools, all different schools, where they might have gone to receive their degree and or do their residencies. So they bring a lot of information to the table. I'm actually from Alabama, but I've been in South Carolina for 31 years, as I mentioned. I went to UAB. I can talk about the